The Mind's Eye with BJ Turnov is available on Stitcher Radio, Podbean, iTunes, all major platforms. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. Feed your head, engage your brain, and enter the Mind's Eye. You're now standing at the intersection of history and mystery, the center for science and the strange, and your source for the subliminal to the criminal. I'm DJ BJ Turnov, your host of this auditorium of audacity. It's the end of January. We got Super Bowl right around the corner here in America, but really it's a worldwide sport since it is the most valuable sporting event in the world every single year, and the World Series is really no slouch, rounding out the top 5 sporting events most valuable in the world. In all, the American sports entertainment industry generates about $73 billion per year for the owners, players, investors, and advertisers. With all that money at stake, do you think the sports profiteers are going to leave anything up to chance? Brian Touhy certainly thinks not, and he's got the facts and figures to prove it. Brian is America's leading expert on game fixing. He's recognized by the United States Supreme Court as a scholarly authority on the matter. He's also worked with the Center for Investigative Reporting for a piece that was featured in Sports Illustrated. On this show, he's going to expose the corruption inside sports leagues like the NFL, Major League Baseball, and the NBA. He'll show you the greedy collusion between them and the TV networks, how they use crooked referees and the coddled players knowingly and unknowingly to manipulate the games. All the corruption and conspiracies the pro sports leagues don't want you to know about after this break. Back here on the Mind's Eye, and no matter what, you can't argue with numbers. Stats like the control group, who comprised of regular day volunteers who consistently outperformed mediums in a psychic test, the soaring levels of organized social media manipulation campaigns, or the age of the stone tools that was recently unearthed in Tanzania. And that's what I love about science. You can count on it, just like you can count on us every day, giving you interesting articles like the ones I just mentioned on our social media pages, Twitter and Facebook. At Mind's Eye Show is the handle, at Mind's Eye Show. One thing you can't find there, although you can find the links to it, is a article that I recently wrote, and it is a bit of a doozy. It's on, the whole one's on our website, themindseyemedia.com, and I'm calling it the Turnoff Papers because I was inspired by Hamilton and last week's inauguration day, and pretty much. And before I tell you really anything about it, let me warn you, it is not for the politically and historically squeamish. There's going to be something there that you hate, and there's going to be something there that you love, but I implore you to read the whole thing. And what I did is I looked at the past, present, and future of America by analyzing the conservative Republican and Democratic liberal point of views on the biggest political and pop culture moments of 2020, Biden versus Trump, social justice movements like defund the police and Black Lives Matter, and Hamilton, of course, since it was inspired by it. And my goal for the piece was to extend an olive branch and a little bit of an ass spanking on behalf of each political party to the other one. While you're there at the website, go check it out at least real quickly, and then you can see some information about tonight's guest who joins us in just a few short moments, Brian Touhy. He doesn't want you to believe all the hype you hear about fair play in professional sports leagues, because he's going to share the stories about drugs, the illegal black market of gambling, mafia, and outright rigging of games. All those ridiculous referee calls like last night's Brady game. You're going to start to really understand why in a Mind's Eye moment. Be there. Our guest, Brian Touhy, is America's leading expert on game fixing and sports corruption. He's coming on to talk about his latest, The Fix is Still in Corruption and Conspiracies the Pro Sports Leagues Don't Want You to Know About. First and foremost, strong first name, sir, from one Brian to the next. Appreciate your time here.
No problem, Brian. And I can definitely remember your name. That'll be good.
Yeah, it's on the screen also, just in case. But
Oh, good.
we're good here. So let's just talk a little bit about you before we get into the books. I'll talk a little bit about your credentials, I guess. Reading up on your biography, it says that the United States Supreme Court recognizes you as a scholarly authority. How do you earn that?
The funny thing is, I didn't even know I was technically a scholarly authority until someone else told me I was. Apparently, what happened was the American Gaming Association, which deals with all the, gambling in the United States, lobbyist group, when the Supreme Court was hearing the case about legalizing sports gambling in other states outside of Nevada, they actually cited my book, Larceny Games,
Hmm.
in their brief or whatever they filed to the Supreme Court. So that's what makes me now a scholarly authority, is I've been cited, my work's been cited in front of the Supreme Court to get a decision.
Oh, well
There I am.
done. Very good.
Yeah.
I got to get a signed copy from you. I think that means then that's going to be worth a pretty penny for sure. But you're going to go down in the annals of history. I mean, that says something right there, right?
Yeah. Like I say, it's cool sounding, because if people start giving you a coffee, just say, hey, look, I'm a scholarly authority on the subject. They probably don't know what that means, and I'm not totally sure I know what that means, but it sounds really cool. So
Talk to
I'll
the
roll.
Supreme Court. That's what you say.
Yeah.
Talk to them. All right. Well, let's get into your books here. The Fix is in, and the aforementioned sequel, The Fix is still in. It shows that sports corruption is really a spectrum. We know about the Tim Donaghy's, the Pete Roses, the scandalous days of boxing, but you show that corruption really takes a lot of different forms. It's not the ones we always think about.
Exactly. And that's, I think, the problem for a lot of sports fans is a lot of this stuff gets broken up and spread apart, and nobody ever connects the dots between all of these things. Everything always seems in sports to be an isolated incident. Like this guy got caught using steroids. Well, it's an isolated incident. Nobody else did it. Well, no, there's been a ton of people who have been busted for steroids and performance enhancing and drugs. It's not an isolated incident. It's just one part of a bigger spectrum. And that's why I kind of got focused into game fixing, because in the United States, the argument is that games are never fixed. It hardly ever happens, and in fact, like the NFL claims, it's never happened once in their entire history. And I didn't believe that. I mean, there's been scandals all over the world, I should say, in soccer and tennis and other sports, where we know that people have fixed games, where people have been arrested and sent to jail for fixing games. Yet, how do we think that in the United States a crime like that never occurs? And so once I kind of got into it and dug around, I found that, yeah, there was things going on all over the place that nobody really paid that close of attention to.
It's kind of like the converse of Europe, where they acknowledge it, but they don't really do too much. I mean, they do some stuff, but they don't hurt you too bad. Or in America, where we would say, nah, it doesn't happen, but when we do it, we're gonna penalize you pretty harsh under the law. I mean, we even had congressional hearings about steroids.
True, but it's funny because, like with game fixing, which is my main focus with
Hmm.
all of this, is, it's a crime that literally happens everywhere in the world but the United States. And I defy anybody to pick out another crime that happens all over the world, but yet the United States is free from it being a crime. you know? I mean, in fact, think of something. I mean, anything. I mean, you can't come up with anything. But yet that's what sports fans are led to believe. And I think part of it is you have this apparatus like ESPN, which is essentially, what I call the propaganda arm of the major leagues, and they don't report on any of these bad things. They don't even investigate for any of these bad things. So therefore, everything looks peachy keen, which is great because they're in bed. ESPN's in bed with all these major leagues and funding these major leagues. So everybody's in it together. Nobody wants to hear any of the bad stories, and therefore it gets whitewashed right out of existence.
Yeah, there's like a perception versus reality, and the media, ESPN, like you said, they definitely help carve out the difference there, and you shown in the book that the league definitely does that too, as well. Your first book came out about, well, I guess about 10, 11 years or so ago. How has the face of sports corruption changed at all, particularly with the advent of really highly sophisticated technology?
Well, it's interesting that because it depends where you're talking. Again, in the United States, supposedly none of this stuff ever happened.
Right.
So it's hard to say, what exactly is going on. I mean, I think the legalization of sports gambling in many states is a good thing, on the surface at least, because we knew that organized crimes, probably the second biggest moneymaker, was sports gambling because it was all done illegally across the United States, and there was billions upon billions of dollars being wagered on these games, and nobody knew what was happening with the money. Nobody knew where it was going, who it was going to, where it was funneling. Nobody knew because none of it was monitored. Well, now that it's become legalized, at least, some states now have it above the board where all this stuff could be looked at. We can see how much money is being gambled, but it's only to a really certain extent, because the problem with legalized sports gambling now is that it's mostly controlled by these big corporations, which almost is another level of corruption. But the problem with the corporations is they're worried about the bottom line. So for a lot of sports bettors, and you can even see this like on Twitter, on Facebook with some of these sports gambling communities, is some guy will want to bet $1,000 on the game, but the major corporation that runs the sports book will limit him to like a $10 bet. Well, if this guy's a professional gambler and he wants to bet $1,000 and the legal sports book's only letting him bet $10, guess what? He's going to go back to the illegal bookie and bet $1,000 because that's how he's making his money. That's how he's making his living. So even though it's legalized and above the board and being monitored and controlled, at the same time, it's still allowing this black market to exist that nobody could, penetrate because of these limits that these sports books are putting out there.
So really the mobs and the gangsters and the mafia, their influence really hasn't waned, even with, the proliferation of technology and, some of the legalization in certain states. And it really hasn't, this area is still active. And
Yeah, I'm certain it is because, again, you have guys who want to bet $10,000. You have guys who are betting $100,000 a game. And again, you're not going to be able to do that on your phone through the, MGM app or the FanDuel app or DraftKings or what have you. And if you can't bet the way you want to bet, you're going to find a way to gamble the way you want to gamble. And so, again, it leads right back to the illegal black market where everything in terms of corruption and game fixing is probably occurring in the first place anyway. Because there are guys out there, that are, like, say, betting 6 figures, even 7 figures on certain games. But again, none of that is being monitored. None of that is being, there's no oversight on it. So if you're going to fix a game, especially like a college game, which I think is very easy to fix, a college basketball or football game with only a few $1,000s, who's going to pick up on the fact that the game's being fixed when, even though there's all these, betting monitoring services out there, and these big sports books that are watching every bet that comes through, if the money's not being funneled through those organizations, you have no idea what's going on. So therefore, a game could be fixed very easily with nobody's eyes upon it.
And I guess part of your argument is that, there's fixing, there's manipulating, and there's kind of a Venn diagram of it, and there's definitely micro manipulations, and there's differences, but there's, like I said, overlapping. And part of that is that the league manipulates it, and I thought kind of one of the shocking things that I read from the book is that, and I quote, that there's no law preventing the league from, altering an undesirable outcome for them, their broadcast partners and their sponsors. I mean, it can't really be that black and white. A league could pretty much do whatever they want to manipulate.
Oh, certainly. It is that black and white. That's the scary thing. There is no law that prevents a league like the NFL from fixing its own game. None. No federal law. At least I don't think there's a state law, but there's definitely no federal law. There's 2 laws that come close. One is based off the quiz show scandal that happened back in the 1950s when, like I argue with sports today, the television networks were rigging game shows to make them more interesting for the people watching at home. But the law that was passed specifically states you can't rig an intellectual contest. Well, we know sports isn't intellectual, so it doesn't
Right.
fall under that banner. The other law is the Sports Bribery Act, which passed about 10 years later in 1964. But that says you cannot bribe someone like a coach, a referee, or a player to alter the outcome of a game. Well, that leaves a lot of gray area because what if you go to, whoever, Tom Brady, you say, hey, look, dude, we've done a lot for you in the past. How about you do a little something for us this weekend to make sure you lose this game? It's not a bribe. It's not a threat. It's just, asking like a favor. Or like Tim Donaghy alleged with the NBA, the NBA basically dictated to its referees how they wanted the game officiated. Now, that doesn't mean every rule is followed to the letter of the law. And according to Donaghy, the referees understood that, hey, if we're going to look out for this foul, it's going to favor this team. Well, that team is the team the NBA wants to win, so be it. That's how we go do our job because they're the bosses telling us how to do our job. It's that simple. And so there's no other law that exists out there that prevents a league from fixing the game. The closest thing a lot of people would argue would be fraud, that this would be fraud because, people are betting on the sports and maybe the outcomes are prearranged. But guess what? You can bet on professional wrestling. And I think we all know that's pretty well arranged ahead of time. So if you can bet on professional wrestling and that can be rigged and nobody cares about it, same thing could be said about the NFL, the NBA, or any of these other sports.
If someone's gambling on wrestling, shame on you. I know it's a disease, but good Lord, that's a pretty low place to begin on wrestling.
You can make money. Why not?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I never thought about actually could you gamble on WWE? That's pretty funny. And losing, and really the whole reason for this is to make money. So league would manipulate with foul calls or whatever. And the whole point would be to extend series and it's all about the money, right? It's just to get more money.
Well, and the amazing thing to me was, and this came back up recently in my head. There was a guy back in the 1968, I think it was, who worked for the Rand Corporation. And he wrote a research paper, and the topic was, have the World Series been fixed? And using these highbrow mathematics, which I have no idea what they equate to because it's been 30 years since I had a math class. and if I can't do it on my calculator, I can't figure it out anymore.
And don't look over here for the answers when it comes to math.
Yeah.
So.
But anyway, this guy back in 1968 wrote this paper for Rand, and he basically determined that through his mathematics that the World Series had gone to 7 games more often than it should have, statistically speaking. And his argument was very much like mine, even though it was 40 years before I wrote my book, and that he said, if the World Series goes to 7 games more often, that's going to mean more ticket sales, more concession sales, more, parking sales, more T-shirts and hats being sold. Basically, it's making more money for everybody involved. So why wouldn't they do that? And again, through his statistical modeling, that's what he found was taking place. And what I found is after he published the paper, for the next 10 years, the World Series kept going to 7 games way more often than it should have as well. And so I think the guy was onto something, and it's the same thing today. I mean, sports is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and like I argue on my website, if you have control of a multi-billion-dollar industry, why would you leave it up to chance when you don't have to?
One of the chapters of your books, it talks about revenue sharing and how, I guess it seems like that actually probably could have made it worse in showing that, I guess as the fan, you think that, oh no, the team, they want to win a championship. They're going to make a lot more money. But in reality, especially in the NFL where, winning the championship, it's more of a feather in the cap than an actual financial windfall. And I think that's kind of an interesting look at it. And I think you can kind of look at revenue sharing in 2 ways. One way that you do is, or in one way is that, they don't care enough to fake storylines because really there's going to be marginal difference in the profit. But then the other way is, well, if they just keep extending the series, they're all going to, essentially make more money, I guess.
Well, exactly. I mean, especially with the NFL. Because the vast majority of the NFL's money comes from television broadcast rights. I mean, they make like $6 or $7 billion a year now, just on the broadcast rights alone, and that literally pays every player's salary. I mean, so the NFL owners really never actually pay a player. Really, the networks do. When you think about it, the money just goes through the owners to the players, but they don't really spend a dime on the athletes. And so, when you have that much revenue sharing, and it's anywhere, and it's funny, you can't find an exact stat on it, but it's anywhere from 70 to 85% of all the NFL's money is shared. And that includes stuff like T-shirt sales, things you wouldn't necessarily think, even ticket sales to a certain extent. The visitors get a chunk of the money, and some of the money gets shared amongst all the teams. So, as long as people are watching, as long as people are interacting with it, everybody in the NFL is profiting from this. So this year, you have the Packers are in the NFC Championship game. Meanwhile, you have the Jaguars that won 1 game all season, but technically money-wise, they're going to make the same amount of money this year. And that's a good thing for the Jaguars, and it's not a bad thing for the Packers either. But that's the thing is if you get the storylines right, you get the right, push of certain players and superstars and what have you, and you get enough eyes on the television networks so that advertisers are spending more money, the networks are willing to spend more money next time the contracts come up for the NFL. Well, everybody's going to profit from that. So why not push certain storylines when you know down the line you're going to get money in your pocket from it? And it's legal to do.
What about a team like the Packers? They're the only publicly owned, I guess, sports franchise. In this way, with revenue sharing, are they making more money, or really, it doesn't even matter?
No, it doesn't matter because again, about 85% of their money is the same amount of money that the Jaguars are making, that the Bears are making, that the Seahawks are making, that every other team is making because it's all shared. I mean, where the Packers are profiting is from sales in their specific fan shop. And one thing that owners don't share is the luxury boxes, the money that is made from the sales of luxury boxes in the stadium.
All the local money, essentially.
Yeah, but a lot of it exactly is just local revenue. But even like I say, ticket sales, which you would think is all just going to the team, actually does still get spread out to the other teams as well. So again, the vast majority of the money is shared. So, if you're a team that's had the playoffs, you might root for Patrick Mahomes to win another Super Bowl because you think, you know what? That's going to get more people watching TV. That's going to sell more Patrick Mahomes jerseys. And the funny thing is, if you go to the NFL.com and buy a Patrick Mahomes jersey, guess what? That money split equally amongst all 32 teams. So the Jaguars are getting a portion of that money. The Packers are getting a portion of that money. The Bears are. Everybody is. So everybody wins when you buy a Patrick Mahomes jersey from the NFL.com.
Hopefully they split the fees on having to burn the ones like, I guess, Aaron Hernandez as well. And I'm mainly going to bring up this next point just because it's more of a jab to my brother. He's a Mets fan. I'm a Yankees fan. And he never listens to the show, so it's not like he's going to hear this. But what do you think about how do you view teams like the Yankees who don't really care about revenue sharing and seem to, they care about winning at the stake of profit? How does that kind of throws a thorn in everything, right?
No, because there is revenue sharing in Major League Baseball. It's not as extensive as it is in some of the other leagues, but it does exist. And it is, really the Yankees are the way things probably should be if everything was on the level. If you really wanted to be an owner and you really wanted to win a championship and you're willing to spend the money, why not? That's kind of my argument is why not do it? I mean, that's kind of the fair thing. I mean, that's why I never got like the NFL draft and the NBA draft. Why, if you're a player coming out of college and you get drafted by like the Jaguars, who are going to have the number one pick this year, why do you have to go play for the Jaguars? Why can't you sell your services to whatever team's willing to give you the most money or give you the best deal or where you might want to play? What if you live in, Seattle your whole life, you want to play for the Seahawks? Why can't you just go play for the Seahawks? Why are you forced to go here? Well, that's part of the whole control system that the NFL and the NBA has, put together. But the Major League Baseball is a little looser in those regards. There's still a draft and there's still those sorts of things, but it's not as bad once you get to free agency where you can really sell your wares to the highest bidder, which in a way is very American, probably the way it should be. But
yeah, but
there still is sharing there.
Yeah, I guess that would make sense. But like you said, it's all about control and it, it all comes down to the money, right? So, we talked about we know about the Tim Donaghy's, like we said, the Black Sox and all that stuff. I'm really interested in, and what I thought fascinating about your book, again, we're talking with Brian Touhy, talking about his book, The Fix Is Still In, is, looking at how the league isn't necessarily maybe outright cheating, but there's kind of these micro manipulations that they do, and the best way to do that would be obviously through the refs who are their employees. And then it made me think about how the NFL referees, they go into a tent nowadays when they have to do like an instant replay, and they're getting the call from the headquarters. And to me, they present it as an idea as that's going to correct, that's the best way to get the correct call. But to me, after reading your book, it's kind of like the exact opposite.
Well, yeah, and that's one of my arguments about sports in general is you have all this technology now available to all the leagues, and they employ none of it, really. And, you could have probably, gadgets within the football and lasers on the field so you could mark precisely how far the ball went. You wouldn't have to have two guys with those stupid poles determining what are first downs, with the 10 yards. You could have it all done electronically, probably with no issues whatsoever. You wouldn't have to go out and measure for the first down. You could have the lasers basically tell you, bam, he made the first down. That easy, bang. But the funny thing is, like you say, with the referees under the hood now, is I think it'd be really fascinating for the fans at home if you could listen into those conversations instead of Fox bringing in some retired referee to tell you, well, I think this is what they're going to do. Why can't you just hear the guys talk about it? Why can't you hear the ref and NFL headquarters argue about the call and determine what they're looking at? Why can't you hear that? My argument is you can't hear it because that's where they're fixing things. That's where they're going, hey, look, we don't really, this really shouldn't be a touchdown because of X, Y, and Z, because also we don't want these guys to win. So why don't you go out there and tell everybody he was out of bounds? And I think that's what happens sometimes.
Yeah.
It sounds sad. It sounds really sad when you say it out loud. But, the truth of the matter is if you can't hear the conversation, how do you know that's not happening? Everybody, most skeptics would say, oh, there's no way that's happening. Well, how do you know? You're not privy to the conversation. And there's a lot of plays, in football where you could rule something a catch because of A, B, and C, but they rule it not a catch because of X, Y, and Z. Well, both arguments are valid. Why does one overrule the other? And a lot of times I think it's because of how they want to sway a game.
Yeah, like in an era of transparency, the NFL decides to just go under the hood and not show or hear anything.
It's bizarre because, you're sitting at home watching it on your, 80-inch HD TV, and you can clearly see, this guy's out of bounds. And then the referee comes out and tells you, no, he was in bounds. As a fan, you get incensed. And it's not like this only happens once in a blue moon. It happens a lot in some of these sports where they seem to clearly get the call incorrect, even after reviewing it. And that's, again, why is that? If you have all this technology, all these brains and everything working on it to be as officiated as well as possible, how do you get these major calls that wrong? Well, my argument is they're not wrong. They're actually right for the league, but maybe they're wrong for the people watching at home.
Yeah, it's too many times. I think there's a sports show that has, literally a weekly one where they talk about what's the top 5 worst calls that make no sense. And that's every single week. So it's you can look at it like it's frustrating, or, I guess you can kind of look at it from your way. And, particularly in the NBA where it seems like, I felt like, I don't know if you, do you, how much sport? You have to watch sports, although I guess you probably don't enjoy too much of it, right?
No, I don't watch them like I used to. A lot of it is just, it'll be on in the background, and if something happens, I'll look up from reading a book and be like, oh, that was interesting. Or, you catch the highlights later, you see something on Twitter, and then you go check it out or whatever. But no, I can't watch them like I used to because it's just, I see through it. So to me, it's so apparent and so easily to see through what they're doing that it's not exactly entertainment anymore for me.
Your book made me think of like last year's the NBA playoffs in the bubble this past summer, where it just seemed like every single playoff match started off 3-1, and then the other team would come back 3-3, and then it seemed like every single series had a 7-game with 7 games, and I was just like, how can this even be possible? So your book made me kind of like retroactively think to some of the more recent ones.
That's my hope with the book, of all my research. It's not to get necessarily people to stop watching. It's more to get people to watch more intelligently and sit there like you just did and question, well, how is it that, like you say, all these games are all of a sudden going to game 7? Why is that happening? Is that really natural, or is that in the era, like you said, of the NBA bubble and all that, were they doing that and manipulating to get that result because, well, they lost half their season, so they had to do something to make back that money? The best way to do it is to extend playoff series. Again, if you're a business, that's a great business decision, right? Get your money back by extending series. Why wouldn't you do it again if it's perfectly legal? And those are the kind of arguments I try to make, because I just want fans to be more aware of what they're actually consuming.
Yeah, it's never a good look when, I guess, your own one of your own owners, Mark Cuban, said, allegedly, says your league is rigged, staring at the old NBA commissioner, right? Like, that's never good. And the NBA, it really is. it really has problematic, and I'll go down the conspiracy hole with you. I have no problem doing that. I think every single year with the NBA draft, you always have to bring up the Ewing conspiracy with the I guess the balls. So NBA's got some serious issues when it comes to that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, again, like I said, it goes back to the first NBA draft when they, I believe, forced Patrick Ewing onto the New York Knicks as opposed to sending him to Seattle or San Antonio or something.
And I'm a Knicks fan, so be careful there, okay?
But I mean, again, if it's your league and you have this revenue sharing and you want to get the most bang for your buck with a guy who is pretty much as can't miss a prospect as Patrick Ewing was, you don't want him playing in Seattle on the Supersonics where nobody's going to see him. You want that guy in New York, the biggest media market, making a big splash, number one pick. You want him there where everybody in the world can see him. Makes perfect sense. So I believe they organized it and orchestrated it to make sure that's exactly what happened. Again, business decision. It's not that hard. I mean, it seems like everybody's like, oh, it's a big conspiracy theory. No. It's a business decision. Now, how many other businesses do this sort of thing? I mean, my argument that I always make is, look, if you were McDonald's and there was an FDA-approved additive that you could put in your hamburger that would make the hamburger taste better every time somebody took a bite of it, McDonald's would put that in its hamburgers tomorrow because they're going to sell a lot more hamburgers. And that's exactly what these leagues can do. They can manipulate these things, these games, as you're consuming them to make them more entertaining and more interesting, because that's going to keep you watching longer. That's going to make them more money, and it's perfectly legal for them to do it. So, again, what's stopping them from doing it? My argument is nothing. They are doing it because that's what's making them all this money.
The cigarette companies wouldn't put additives in their cigarettes to make you more addictive. No, nothing like that. I know you said before that you don't really watch too many, or you kind of have it in the background. But is there a recent game that kind of stands out in your mind that kind of made you question it a little bit?
Well, I think you go back 2 years ago, and there was that Los Angeles Rams, New Orleans Saints, the NFC Championship game, where there was that clear pass interference foul that was not called on the field. And it's really not about that game. To me, it's more the reaction afterwards. Because, I mean, I think everybody and their brother realized that was a horribly missed call. That definitely should have been a penalty. There was at least 2, if not 3 officials who were literally looking at that play. And if you watch the replays and watch the officials, they're looking at that play. Not one of them draw a flag. And they just allow it to happen. And my argument is, okay, if that was such a horribly missed call, that was so bad, how come the NFL didn't do anything to any one of those officials that we know of? They didn't get reprimanded. They didn't get suspended. They didn't get fined. They didn't get fired. They were allowed to keep officiating in the league. Now, if they had done such a poor job, if you or I did that poor job at our job, we might face some consequences, right? So if these guys were making a mistake, why didn't they face any consequences? And that's always my argument is if it's a bad call, maybe it's bad in your eyes, but to the NFL, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe that's exactly what they wanted, and that's why it happened. Because I think that's a big telltale sign when you have something that egregious and yet there's no repercussions from it. What else can you assume is that that's really what they wanted to have happen?
And even when they are caught, and cheating scandals are known, Spygate, Deflategate, I mean, it's not even really bad for business because it's keeping you in the news cycle all year round. I mean, I don't know about you, but sure. I was sick of hearing about that. I think Deflategate was for a whole freaking year,
Well, yeah, and because, like you say, it's inflamed then by sports media, but it's amazing what is inflamed and what isn't inflamed. Like say, Deflategate, like you say, went on forever. And who cares? Well, it was the football flatter than it should have been. Yeah, who cares? Does it really matter? The grand scheme of things, no. But then, you find out, this player was busted, for running drugs, and this player was busted for beating his wife, and this guy was busted for beating his kid. And then that's pops up for 2 hours, and then completely disappears. And then, next weekend we're rooting for that same player on the field because he's out there playing because he had no, repercussion from the league for what he did. What should we be paying attention to here? I mean, that's a little bit of look over here while we, hide this under the rug.
Yeah, I think maybe I just brought that up because I'm a bitter Jets fan and Spygate, Deflategate, and I kind of went through some. I was going through some stuff after reading how I didn't even realize this that the Belichick Brady era for their home games was nothing even comes close to it by any other sports league, and then it just maybe had flashbacks about Spygate and Deflategate. So
Well, I can even go. I'll go a step further if you want me to.
please do, especially if it's the Patriots.
Yeah, it's totally the Patriots. So. I don't know if this is true or not, okay? But I was on a sports radio show in the Boston area, and after the show, I didn't say this on the air, but after the show, he's talking to me, and he says, look, he goes, I'm good friends with, I don't remember the player's name, but the player was on the Patriots, and then he went to another team. And he basically, when they came back to play the Patriots, he went through, the whole rigmarole, went through the game, and he getting off the bus, getting in the locker room, playing the game, getting off. And when he was leaving the stadium, one of the security guys who was working, recognized the player as being a former Patriot, went up, started talking to him, and basically told this player that the Patriots had not just recorded them, like on the field as in Spygate, that the Patriots had wired the entirety of Gillette Stadium for sound and video and watched their opposing team from the moment they got off the bus until they got right back on it. They were watching them in the locker room. They were watching their coaching meetings. They knew exactly what the coaches were saying up in the booths. They knew everything, which is why they never lost at home, because they knew exactly what was coming before it happened.
Yep, I believe that. There's no doubt, and I'm going to have to play this clip for my friend who's a Patriots fan, and we have a little thing there. So I thank you, and I appreciate for that one. I'm definitely going to throw that in her face. Yeah, I mean,
you look at the record; it's insane at home. It was insane. They were like 83-1 at home or something like that, and they were like undefeated when leading at halftime at home. Well, that's because they knew what was coming. I mean, home field advantage shouldn't be that great in professional football. It's not like it's a different stadium size like in baseball. It's just a football field. The fans shouldn't matter that much. And yet the Patriots did something that was incredible. And I think in a way that this idea that they were maybe really watching their opponents for the entirety of the game from before game, pregame, all the way through to the end of the game makes a lot more sense than them just getting lucky.
Yeah, so incredible that it's definitely not credible at all.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's a record that'll probably never be approached by anybody.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I feel like I'm bleeding hard over here. I'm showing you all my sports misery, Jets, Knicks. Outside of the Yankees, I got not much. Did you grow up as a big sports fan though?
Well, it's funny. I lived outside of Chicago, and my dad and brothers were all like Cubs fans and Bear fans, and somehow I wound up being a Baltimore Oriole fan and a Boston Bruin fan. I don't know. I think the Orioles was because of the 1979 World Series. And I was about 6-7 years old, and I liked their logo, and I liked the orange and black jerseys. I think that's what latched me onto the Orioles. And the Bruins, I think maybe just because, like your name, my name's Brian, and the big B on the front, that was kind of cool. So I don't know, but that's how I wound up being fans of their teams.
So then, what about with the Cubs who didn't win a championship for whatever it was 100 years, and then the Red Sox for 85 years or whatever it is. I mean, doesn't that kind of throw a wrench in your story here or your theory a little bit?
Not entirely. No, because first of all, I don't think baseball is as controlled as like the NFL or the NBA is, because I don't think you can control it as much. I mean, like, even though you go all the way back to the Black Sox, which was 1919 and the fixed World Series, they had 8 guys involved trying to rig that World Series. And I think with baseball, you would need more people than just a few to really, really rig it. Because, even if you had like a starting pitcher, he could give up 7 runs and get pulled in the 3rd inning, but that doesn't mean the offense isn't going to come back and score 9 and win the game. It's a lot harder to really orchestrate an outcome in baseball as opposed to football and basketball, where a few fouls or one NBA player underperforming takes 20% of the team right off the court, and that can influence the outcome of a game. But I think like with football, for example, people say, well, if it's fixed, how come the Lions have never won and how come the Browns have never won? I think a lot of times it boils down to who the league can promote. And even though the Lions and Browns have gotten like a lot of number 1 draft picks, a lot of them have busted out. I think now that the Browns have like Baker Mayfield, who's, the face of Progressive Insurance, they have someone there that they can promote. And so we got the Browns into the playoffs and maybe a Super Bowl down the line. But the Lions had, Matthew Stafford, and Matthew Stafford never really panned into a super great quarterback. He's really good, but he's never great. He wasn't, a talent. And I think that's what happens is like with the NBA, you got a talent like LeBron, who's a real talent, Kobe, who's a real talent, who really is head and shoulders above everybody else. Well, if you get that player and you want him to succeed, then you tell your officials, hey, look, give this dude a little more breathing room to operate. If somebody comes hard at him, call fouls because we want to give him more room. If he's playing defense, be a little lenient because we don't want him to foul out because, of course, these guys never foul out in the NBA. And same with football. You got a guy like Aaron Rodgers. Well, don't call out a holding on his offensive line because we want that guy protected. And I think it's just those little manipulations that allow those superstars to perform even a little better than they should, allows their teams to win a little more often, gets them into the playoffs more often, gets them into the finals more often. So it's just a little push. But I think you need that superstar for the league to latch on to, or that storyline for the league to latch on to then get that help, to get that little extra shove, maybe further than you should go.
I've always hated in the NBA how they give superstars their preferential treatment. I guess it was with Michael Jordan. Obviously, he got unbelievable leeway. But I think there's that one image where he's where he shoots over Brian Russell with the Utah Jazz. I think it was like the '96 finals. And if you actually look at that play, he completely shoves Brian Russell off of him. Yeah. And that's just like the perfect example of that. And that he used to get that on and on. And that's one thing about NBA that I never really looked at it that way as like a manipulation. But
yeah, it doesn't have to be a thing where you get like everybody on the opposing team to lay down and tank it. All you need is if you got, again, Jordan's another great example. He's an incredible talent. But like you said, he also got a lot of help from the officials. He also had Scottie Pippen, and he had some other good players around him as well. But if you get the help from the officials, that creates a little bit more of a bubble around you to allow you to do those things. Like you say with the push-off, and then he stands there and almost like poses for photographs as that last shot goes in. It all works out well in the end for the NBA. And the same thing, it's not like, even though the Jazz lost that series, that they lost money or anything like that. Sure, they didn't win a title, but you know what? The owner made money from it. Everybody else made money from it. It's not like they went home empty-handed.
Yeah, the most iconic image, one of the most iconic images of him, it's of him actually fouling somebody, not making a game-winning shot. And I really hate those Baker Mayfield commercials, but he is just an awful actor.
Really? I like
just
those.
I just think he's just such an awful actor. I don't know if you've seen any, probably not because these are probably local, Ravens Royal Farms commercials. Justin Tucker, he's all over. He might be the worst actor of all time. So you're lucky you don't subject yourself to that there.
I get to see. We used to have some Chicago Blackhawk ones with Patrick Kane and Jonathan Tays, and those guys were as stiff as boards. I mean, they were really bad.
One thing that you brought up that you probably shouldn't have had your hands on was through a FOIA request was this gambling with your life video. Do you mind, and how the the FBI kind of got involved there? Do you mind sharing a little bit about that story?
Well, basically what it is I found through all these Freedom of Information Act requests was that the FBI used to give presentations to college and major league teams telling them about the dangers of gambling and drugs. And after a while, I guess those presentations were kind of getting boring. So they decided to create a video, and they did it with the help of NBA Productions and had Greg Gumbel as the host of the video. And it's about half an hour long. And it talked about all these gambling scandals and even hinted at a few that never really came to light. And they interviewed former mobsters and players who were approached by gamblers and stuff like that to fix games. And they even gave scenarios in the video how players might get approached to fix games. And I found that this video existed, so I asked for it. And to my own kind of surprise, the FBI sent it to me on a DVD. And it was cool because it was redacted. So they had parts to where I could see what was going on, but I couldn't hear anything. Other parts where I couldn't see anybody, but I could hear what was being said. And then there were some really like bad edits where they chopped things out of it. But they still sent it to me. It was like probably a little over 20 minutes long. And I know, again, with what they cut out, it had to be around a half an hour. And the funny thing was, is after I got it and watched it, I was like, oh man, this is really cool. And I think if it might have been before, but it was somewhere around that same time I wound up going on the Alex Jones show. And I think either on the air or just after we were done, I mentioned it to Alex. And he's like, "Oh my God, we got to get that video. We got it. We'll release it and blah, 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 blah." Well, then I got contacted by the FBI, and the FBI said to me, they said, if you make that video public, you'll probably face some sort of charges, basically. Because they said it's still, they should have never technically released it to me, I guess, because technically it was the NBA's, because it was NBA Productions that helped to make it. And technically it was still under copyright, so I didn't really have the rights to release it and make it public. But at the same time, I was thinking, well, you guys released it to me. I got it through the Freedom of Information Act. That kind of makes it mine, doesn't it? Doesn't that make it public record now that you've released it? But I didn't really want to go through the whole legal rigmarole of it all. And it's not like I could leak it because they knew only one person had it, so it wasn't like, if I leaked it like to Alex Jones and they went to Alex Jones, like, "Where'd you get it?" And he's like, "Well, I can't tell you." They'd probably be like, "Well, let's see. Brian Touhy was on your show, 3 weeks ago. We released that video to Brian Touhy. I think we could put two and two together here." So I still have it. It's still kind of cool. So that's why in the book I kind of describe everything that happens in it, because I'm like, look, if I can't at least release the video, at least I could write and tell you basically everything that's in it.
Yeah, what was just give a slight hint to the listener about what was like one of the things that you found out from there.
Well, one of the things that they talked about, which is still something I'm trying to get to the bottom of, honestly, is there was this guy who was known as, it was a code name or name he went by, of Dr. Bordeaux, which sounds like, some horror movie, like Dr. Bordeaux. But he, apparently what he would do is he would manipulate players in various ways and especially using women in parties to get at athletes. And it sounded like what he would do sometimes is basically kind of like drug a player, get him kind of involved with the woman, have him like take the woman back to their hotel room. And while the guy is kind of in and out of it with this woman, they'd remove the woman from the room, bring a guy into the room, and then take pictures, basically catching this athlete in bed with another man, and then blackmail the player into saying, "Hey, look, do you want us to release these pictures, or do you want to fix a game for us?" And it's interesting because it seems, like I say, I have some of the files related to it, but I can't really get a whole grasp on what happened, how many players were involved. But the guy definitely was involved with, major league players and college players and several players, not just like two or three, but a lot of players. So I have no idea the depths of it all, but it's all talked about in this video, just it doesn't really plumb the whole depths of the whole scandal.
You had some interesting takes on how to solve certain parts of corruption in each league. I liked your take on the NBA, and how to eliminate season-long tanking and game fixing there, which I thought was pretty interesting. But I guess, overall, what do you think is really the best way to combat sports corruption, I guess, federally and then locally as well?
Well, I think you have to have real oversight. I mean, what happens and what I found, again, going through the FBI files, and even though the FBI files are dated, I mean, they go back to the 70s and 80s, it's still 40 odd years ago, is what happened a lot of times is the leagues have their own like security division. There's NFL security, Major League Baseball has the Department of Investigations. But the problem is they're usually staffed with former like FBI agents. And at least in the FBI files that I saw, what would happen was the FBI would get wind of maybe like a game potentially being fixed. They would go to the NFL with the information, and the NFL would be like, "Oh, don't worry, our dudes will handle it." And then the FBI would liaison with the NFL security people who they used to work alongside, and the NFL people, the security guys, would say, "Hey, don't worry, we'll take care of this, FBI." And the FBI would be like, "Good, because we don't have time to waste on this crap." And they'd go away and leave it to the FBI or leave it to the NFL to investigate themselves. Well, what do you think the result of that is going to be? Nothing. Just like every other investigation. That's why I love, when like right now the Washington football team's investigating itself for all this sexual harassment. Well, what do you think's going to happen? You think they're really going to come out and say, Dan Snyder did all this and he needs to be fired? Right. No. I mean, it's just like the Pedowitz report and all these other things, Major League Baseball investigates itself from steroids, which they knew was rampant in the game, and then they conclude, well, yeah, I guess some guys were using steroids. Well, nothing we can do about it now. So, I mean, that's the problem, is there's no real oversight on these things. I don't know how you can necessarily get into them because they are private companies. But if there was, if ESPN really investigated some of these things, and I mean, there's not many other major sport outlets out there anymore. Sports Illustrated's pretty much dead. There's Defector and there's Deadspin, but they don't really do investigative reporting. If people actually dug into this stuff, maybe you'd get, some traction. You could eliminate some of the corruption, at least get fans recognizing that, hey, some of the stuff ain't on the level and we need to do something about it. Because I think that's how they helped fix steroids in baseball. Is Barry Bonds was such a jerk about breaking all the home run records while he was on steroids that fans outside of San Francisco, fans got upset. And Major League Baseball was like, whoa, well, maybe we need to cool the jets on all this. And they actually did something about it. But I think that's it. I think it really, a lot of ways, comes down to fans paying attention, fans complaining about this stuff, and maybe then the leagues will do stuff. Because, I mean, you can fix, like officiating, you could make it better if you really press the leagues to do so. But nobody really presses the leagues to do so. They're allowed to get away with what they get away with.
And hurt them, hit them where it hurts. Stop watching, right? So, the ratings and the money that goes away. They'll probably start fixing something like baseball did. People got sick of it. Their ratings went down, and they aesthetically started doing something about it.
Yeah, and I think that's what, like you say, it all boils down to the pocketbook. And again, that goes back to them being businesses. The way to affect any business is to affect its money. If you affect its income, it's going to change the way the business operates. And that's the way to clean up sport, really, is to take their money away so they're forced to clean up. Otherwise, they won't get people watching, or at least that's the hope.
Yeah, unfortunately, hard lines and 30 for 30 isn't really taking too deep of a look. They're really just scratching the surface there.
My favorite story, I think, of all is when I came up and I found this FBI article, or I shouldn't say article, this FBI file that said members of the New York Knicks in the early 1980s were shaving points as a favor to their cocaine dealer, which I thought was just a great story. And I put it in my book, Larceny Games. Well, the New York Post, I mean, and it's funny, when I wrote this Larceny Games book, everybody, ESPN, 60 Minutes, HBO Sports, all these people were interested in it, and then nobody did anything with it. But the New York Post found that bit in my book about the Knicks and the shaving points for the cocaine dealer and ran a back page special on it. And I got calls from like CNN, all these people bugging me. It was like on local news out in New York. It went viral, like in a way I'd never experienced before, except it did not go to ESPN. ESPN refused to cover it, and it's because they're the major broadcast partner of the NBA. I'm sure of it. I'm sure NBA or the ESPN made sure that they didn't touch that story, because you can Google it right now and you can see all the different places that story wound up, and you still will not find a link to ESPN on it there.
Yeah, well, cocaine's a hell of a drug, huh? That made me love the Knicks that much more. So, and goddamn, the '80s, what an amazing time! I wish I was a little bit older to experience that, at least. Maybe not half the music, but definitely the experience.
Haircut is great.
Get out of here! But
come on.
If someone's into hair bands like you, or has a story, or just really wants to reach out to you, Brian, where can they do that? Tell them how.
The best way to get hold of me is on my website, which is thefixisin.net, and my email's there, and people can reach me. And I mean, all my Twitter and Facebook and all that crap's on there too. But yeah, thefixisin.net. You can find my books, you can find my email, and you can find me.
Truly eye-opening conversation. Brian Touhy, thank you so much for your time, for talking about your latest book, The Fix Is Still In.
No problem. Thanks for having me on, Brian. I appreciate it.
The Mind's Eye wrap-up when we come back. Mind's Eye wrap-up here, and I pretty much just bled my sports heart out there for you over the past 30 minutes or so. You don't have to feel too bad for me. I am a Yankees fan. Don't hate me too much. Parents are from the Bronx, but I am also a Knicks and Jets fan. So there's a lot of good, and then there's a lot of terrible. And if you're like me, you probably want your own owner kicked out. James Dolan, there's been, for the Knicks, there's been nothing but a black cloud hanging over the team ever since he took over. you probably feel helpless like me with your crappy sports league owner that, the team that you love. They own the team. What can we do? They're not going to fire themselves. But there actually might be something that we can do with. The Europeans may have just shown us the way. Fans of the Hales Owen Town Football Club, they recently boycotted all of the team's home games, even when they were having a winning season. Could you imagine that? The team eventually went into debt, and the owner relinquished control, and two groups made bids on it, and now they got a new owner. That's how you get it done. You got to hit them where it hurts, in the pockets. That's all they care about. Just tune them out. Don't buy any home game tickets. Well played, guys, but I hope you don't take that tactic here with the mind's eye. We're not no greedy sports league owner. Don't boycott us, please. And just so you don't tune me out, what I'm going to do is we're going to make this the quickest turnaround ever of a new show 2 days from now. Join us to hear about the psychedelic medicine revolution. Really fascinating topic. Until then, be well and let well be. I'm your host, DJ BJ Turnov, signing off for The Mind's Eye. The Mind's Eye with BJ Turnov is available on Stitcher Radio, Podbean, iTunes, all major platforms. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. Hut, hut, hut.